There is something to be said for the remarkable persistence of hatred that people can muster for others. Sometimes it is born out of rhetoric, bad upbringings, or plain old ignorance. It's easy for us to paint the people who seek the eradication of our very existence like the monsters in our nightmares or the ugly-looking dullards who speak in broken sentences with bile spewing all over the place. That's the problem, you see? It's easy to see them that way, to assure ourselves that we will spot the hatred from a mile off, an aura stuck to their skin like molasses and radiating with a light so bright we have time to hide somewhere until they pass us by. But the greatest beasts of all are the ones who have developed the uncanny ability to mask their hate, their rhetoric, and their fear of us in an ocean of pleasantries, religious dogmas, and a genuine belief that they're helping. In a most ironic way, they are hiding their true selves for fear of scorn. Not that it matters much to me, because I can see it all. I can see what they try to hide behind a thin veneer of sincerity thanks to the gifts I was born with. From the earliest years of my life, I was prone to outbursts when I was around mirrors. I couldn't articulate it very well, so I simply called them the twirrer for short. My earliest memory of this experience came through my mom, tucking me into bed when I was 6 years old. Her eyes were red and puffy, nose congested, and her voice was strained as she spoke softly to me. "I hope you had a lovely day today, sweetie, and that you have even lovelier dreams. Mommy loves you so much." She beamed at me, the saddest smile strewn across her face as she held me. We're an empathetic species, so I knew she was sad, but had no clue as to why. According to her, I said that I was sad not to have a sibling and that I loved her very much. She was stunned and asked me what I meant, at which point I looked behind her to the mirror attached to my wardrobe. "Your twirrer is holding a baby, but it's not making any sound and they have a red light." "That means something bad happened, Mom," I frowned and looked at her. "I'm sorry, Mommy." She just sobbed and held me. Upon recounting this years later, she said that was the moment she knew I was special, that I could see things others couldn't, because when she glanced back, there was nothing there but our reflection. She is adamant to this day that I'd have had no way of knowing about the pregnancy since there were so many false starts before me and it was their last chance. They didn't want to get my hopes up and then smash my heart to pieces. The night she tucked me in was just a day after she'd miscarried. So it went, if I was around anyone in the vicinity of a mirror, I was able to see whatever it was they were hiding. The ultra-conservative neighbor coming over with his wife for a function who was secretly having an affair with his male best friend, the babysitter who had an affinity for stealing from the families she looked after, and the teacher who frequented message boards dedicated to white nationalism. I saw it all and was forever disturbed by the frequency with which we as a society hide things from the world. Let's go back to the beginning, to how we got here. To the strange starlight town with the stranger traditions. My hometown, left anonymous for fear of reprisal, occupies the demographic of the US that we've all come to know through unflattering stereotypes in the movies or even more ugly portrayals in the media. Predominantly white, cis men and women with mega hats and Bibles cupped in their hands, marching down their white picket fence suburbias with the town militia checking to see if any of us are hiding away. Every door would get knocked on, a friendly voice assuring the family they just needed to do a routine set of questions and check the safety of the family, then they'd move on. There are many instances historically, I'm sure we can all point to where this behavior occurs to various groups, but you never think you'll live through history until you're standing at your own window as the black pickup rolls down the street blasting gospel and 4 burly men come to your door demanding to see the freak they've brainwashed. Some of them knew what I could do through word of mouth and gossip, so you can add satanic rituals to the mix. I was 15, sat in an opulent priest's office after it had been revealed I was non-binary, and a concerned parent called in anonymously to both the school and the church we frequented. I'd already been told by my school that I would not get accepted into the kingdom of heaven because I was born through IVF, the practice of artificial conception outside of the womb. This was just the icing on the shit cake that was my life in Bible-thumping territory. I remember Father Daniels staring at me intently from across a grand mahogany desk, a sly grin on his face as he rubbed flop sweat away with a hand adorned with golden rings. "It's not a matter of what you wanted, Ms. Camille, it's what God wants. He has a plan for all of us, and had we known the circumstances of your son's birth dash." "Excuse me, Father, you can just say child. Their pronouns are they/them. We've been through this with the school, they're non-binary. My mom interjected, a polite tap in her foot as one hand gripped the other, a fire in her eyes. I will forever remain grateful that the two people I needed to have my back did so without question when so many others in my place weren't so fortunate. Father Daniel sighed. We've been over this, Miss Camille. God made your son the way he intended to be made. Your politicization of your child is, quite frankly, unseemly. This ties in with the issue at hand. According to the church, your son was made in a manner that goes against the very laws of nature, the will of God himself. This is something the church is staunchly against and, to an extended degree, the notion that your son's gender is somehow wrong. To question God's wisdom, he pauses, holding his hands up incredulously as I sat silently, arms crossed and nostrils flaring. Well, it's just not what we do. Faith is a test of one's fortitude, both your quest for children and, by extension, these maladies, these issues in your son's head, are but another test. The church cannot and will not confirm your son, nor will we continue to support you at our doors if you decide to go down this route. On my way out, I saw him standing there stone-faced beside a grand mirror adorned with a gilded golden frame depicting angels and scriptures of the New Testament. In his reflection was a bloated facsimile of Father Daniel's, his gut distending outward as a group of small terrified boys held it up with bloodied and beaten hands. As my gaze directed up to the face, I saw eyes not dissimilar to that of a shark, rolled back in the head and a jaw split at the sides to accommodate the flailing limbs of a terrified boy caught between his mandibles, his still visible tear-stained face wrapped up in a black tongue. I must have stood there for only a few seconds before Father Daniels called to me and the figure in the mirror snapped its jaws shut, black dead eyes rolling into their sockets and staring intently at me. It's all right, son, you'll find your way. God's children always swim diligently in the ocean of life. He reached out a hand to place on my shoulder and I smacked it away with considerably more force than I'd wanted. Get your dirty hands off of me. I barked, surprising everyone in the room at my tone and language. He looked completely taken aback and offended. My parents simply stared before casting their gaze to the mirror and back to me as I walked backwards, keeping my eyes locked on him at all times. Let's go, honey. Mom's tone was reassuring, but it was clear she was devastated. The church was her life and she'd given her best years to it both in Sunday service classes and in church functions. This was God's country, and to see my mother denied the opportunity to relish in his light was heartbreaking to see. A small but fierce woman, I was her sole child after years of trying, and she would protect me over any god without question. As a result, we were left isolated and vilified by the community within days. Stones thrown through the window, hateful notes quoting scripture on our doorstep calling for my suicide to add to the percentile of gender-confused queer liberal teens taking their lives every year. One even called in a bomb threat to the sheriff's department, convinced we were aligned with Antifa. Our lives became hell and the roving cars screaming Bible scripture from modded speakers repeatedly declaring we'd soon be burning in hell. The group in particular were known as the Cross-Examiners, Bexus Division. Weirdos even had a little white Jesus strewn across the front of their white outfit. Honestly, to me they looked like they were cosplaying the Knights Templar with a Trumpian flair. There was one family among the chapter that singled us out for their campaign, the Decades. Their patriarch was a man known as Bo who wore military camo and had absolutely never served a day of his life in the army. Tall, buff, and proudly sporting provocative tattoos like the Iron Cross, Confederate flag and a handful of biblical figures right next to the American flag, he wasn't one to mince words. Most nights I'd wake up to him standing out in the cul-de-sac quoting scripture or screaming obscenities at me. I tried to ignore it, but that is increasingly hard when the guy's kids begin beating the shit out of you at school, dead-naming you and ensuring no bastion was safe in person or online. For 2 agonizing years I endured this, memes of my face and body on the impact font, teachers looking the other way when I got picked on and the town sheriffs shrugging their shoulders saying boys will be boys with a sly wink. Fucking pigs. But something happened last week that threw everything into overdrive. I opened my fucking mouth and said something I shouldn't have. It was a weekend and I was on my way back from my job at Home Depot. I used my chosen name Alex and people I worked with were polite enough, never saying much about it beyond a few probing questions. I honestly thought I'd turned a corner until the Decades turned up. They giving jobs out to your kind now? Fucking unbelievable. Did you suck any dick to get the position, Nancy boy? How'd they figure out what kinda uniform to give to ya? Dresses or breeches? Bo chuckled, spitting dip into his tissue and showing stained yellowing teeth. I stared him down and didn't return the chuckle. Like any bully, he didn't care for that and took a step closer, the sheer smell of him making me gag. You got something to say, boy? By happenstance, a mirror was propped not too far off to the side and I could make out what stood within it. A gaudy, makeup-clad version of Bo, happily applying lipstick and wearing wigs. He looked genuinely overjoyed and in a way I'd never seen him behave. But as soon as my guard was lowered, the twins' eyes locked with mine, the makeup began to run down his face as his very flesh dripped with it. Great chunks of skin began slopping onto his lap as something putrid began emerging from underneath, its face scrunched into a permanent scowl as it did something I'd never seen before. It began smacking on the mirror. Hey! I'm talking to you, sinner. Bo grabbed me and pulled me in close, the sides of his eyes shaking. You think you're better than me? You think I won't do the Lord's work and put you out of your misery? Didn't your daddy teach you to respect your betters? Or do I need to teach you myself, F.A. The slur dripped from his lips with glee as he ran a dirty finger across my lips and smiled, my instincts taking over as I volleyed a kick right to his crotch with a thunderous crack. As he let me go and yelped, a staff member rounded the corner to check on us, having seen the incident on camera. Bo was on his knees, dry heaving as I scrambled to get distance from him. You're no different to me, Bo. You have your own shit to figure out, so stay the fuck away from me or I'll tell everyone what kind of makeup you wear when nobody is looking. I screamed it from the top of my lungs. Not out of intent but a rage that had been building for years. Shoppers turned to see and began murmuring amongst themselves as Bo's eyes darted around the room. Immediately, I knew I'd fucked up. He looked at me once, a large vein threatening to pop on his temple before he barreled past me and sped off in his truck. I was terrified, of course, but not just because of the consequences I feared would come. But because the cracking sound was from the mirror breaking in the corner where something had gotten out. I apologized to my manager and called my mom to get me home, explaining what had happened and rushing me home. She was furious and threatened to call the cops on him, but what good would that do? It was my word against his, the respected community member. We pulled up 20 minutes later to a note spray painted on our door. Sinners live here. Sinners die here. I panicked and ran up to my room as my mom made calls to the sheriff and spoke in frantic tones about moving. I just wanted the world to fall out from under me and swallow me whole, to make it so I never fucking existed. If this is what I'm destined to experience for the rest of my life, then what is the point of fighting back at all? I felt the tears run down my face when a voice called out to me from the corners of my room. You are not what you seem to be, child. It was soft, lilting, and yet it almost filled the room despite its tone. It set me at ease but had a hint of something sinister within it. Blinking in the darkness, I looked around and knew immediately the source, my mirror. What do you mean? A freak like the rest of them say I am? I croaked, dejection weighing me down like a lead balloon. The creature draped in shadow leaned closer and put a malformed hand on the glass, a dark red hue filling the mirror as it spoke. Something more. You are the next step, there are so many like you. Born with gifts, born beyond the cosmos, born beyond the spectrum, born with a connection to them. Its voice filled with glee at the last word, as if remembering a devoted loved one. All you must do is find someone who knows, who understands. Fight back against your oppressors and show them that which they fear most. I stepped forward and stood by my mirror, wiping tears away and perplexed, but emboldened by the words. What they fear the most? What is that? The figure moved its face into the light and it took everything within me not to cry. It was me, a version of me that I so desperately wanted the world to see. Features the way I'd pictured them in my mind 1,000 times when I looked at my body with hatred, a voice that felt so perfectly balanced it didn't make my skin crawl like my own, a face that I knew was my own but was so much more. It looked upon me with the saddest smile as the still monstrous and bird hand came into view, reaching out for my own. That you belong. It faded and left me with a feeling of determination I'd not experienced before. I got on my computer and began doing some digging, searching for anything that would give me answers, and knowing full well time was not on my side. I quickly discovered that just like trans folk, non-binary individuals had been around for much, much longer than anyone would have guessed. Dating back as far as the Mesopotamian era, there were countless individuals who existed beyond the boundaries of gender, hieroglyphs of individuals with no discernible gender taking on duties affixed to husbands and wives. Across every culture there were instances of people like me. The confidence this gave me was palpable and encouraged me to reach out to a Discord server with others who were in similar situations. Being in my late teens in a staunchly religious community, you can imagine how hard it was to make friends. For the first time in my life I felt seen, heard and appreciated for who I was. People using my preferred name and pronouns, simple tasks of respect that took so many here a lifetime to even tolerate. I relished in it while digging deeper into my research before stumbling across a blog that caught my eye. The connection to Nuldus, the dead god beyond the spectrum. I felt a wave of electricity run through me, like I'd woken up for the first time. The details of how those who were born with innate abilities far beyond human understanding, born beyond gender and vilified by communities for what they didn't understand. All of them, supposedly, had a connection to this being. It grew darker outside, and the usual noises of the scriptures never came, so I pressed on. It is said that every child born beyond the spectrum possesses the gift of insight. To see that which is unseen and unravel the secrets of their origin. Some were born by chance, some born in ancient alchemic laboratories, some through the miracles of science. All were destined to be as they are, connected to Nuldus. A passage read from the blog owner who titled themselves Prophet of Null. They await in the black void of nothingness, absent of sound and sight and speech. They will return when their children are at their most vulnerable and in need of a defense when no others come to their aid. Simply see that which is unseen and speak aloud their name, they shall appear. The world is growing, more of us are finding our true selves, and those who are blinded by the fog of ignorance keep trying to push us back. But we are legion, we are many, we will overcome. You are who you were always meant to be. Trust in Nuldus. I leaned back and let the thoughts swirl through my mind, the words of my twirler, the things I'd seen throughout my years. Could this have some weight to it? I hopped back onto the Discord server and began talking to some of those I trusted, a handful of people my age and a bit older who had experienced the same persecution I had. This is gonna sound odd, but do you guys have any talents you'd consider unusual? And don't say anything lewd, that's not what I mean. I let the comment simmer as several people began typing back. Some were joking, but one of them named Avery commented something that made my chest tighten. You mean like seeing shit nobody else does? The conversation stalled for a few moments. Nobody responded or typed before an influx of messages flooded in, everyone remarking their own experiences. Some could sense unusual presences, others hear them, and many of them seeing traits of people they should by no rights have access to. After a frantic call, I brought things under control and explained my role in all this, what I'd seen and what I wanted to do. So you think we're all connected to this thing? Like some hive mind of superhumans? Avery remarked, confusion in their voice. Not quite, I don't think we're any better than anyone else. Just special. A hive mind? Hell no, we can't even agree on a favorite video game or food. But, we're all united by the treatment we've received and the things we've seen. I don't know about you, but I'm curious enough to see if it's true. I remarked, feeling confident around others for the first time in my life. There were murmurs of agreement before Avery asked the most important question. How do we do that? I wouldn't get the chance to respond before a gunshot echoed from outside, followed by a megaphone bearing a familiar voice. You have 60 seconds to step outside, son, or I'm turning you into a fucking orphan. Bo. My hand shook and I grabbed my phone, Discord still running as I bolted down the stairs while a sea of voices called out to me. I only stopped when at the bottom of the stairs, glass shards strewn around the wood floor leading to the front door. Turning my head to the left and towards the mirror we used in our living room where large cracks ran up the entire length of the mirror. Standing inside it was Bo's twirler, twirrer, a face devoid of features save for wide eyes with the smallest pupils, burnt lips giving way to rotted teeth, stared at me as it reared its head back to smash into the mirror once more. "I see you, boy, get out here or I'm firing." Bo called again as a smatter of cheers accompanied his demand. What the fuck was going on? My legs shook, but I put one in front of the other and stood outside, staring down at a scene that made me want to vomit. My mom was on her knees, hands behind her head and sobbing as the entire Deckard family stood around her, each armed with a rifle as Bo pointed a gun at her head. He looked wild, manic, and his entire flock were joining in on the hysteria. "Alright boy, this is how it goes down. You come with us willingly to be delivered, your mom gets off with a warning and keeps her life, living with the shame of raising you for the rest of her days until she meets with the Lord. You resist in any way," he pushes the barrel into the back of her head, a small yelp leaving her before he screams at her to shut up. "You ain't got a mama no more, you hear me?" I stood there, the same feeling of powerlessness that had enveloped me since I was a child, my back against the wall and the sound of smashing against the mirror becoming more frantic. I was trapped on both sides. "You have until the count of 5 to decide," Bo remarked, clicking the back of the gun to signify his commitment. 1. I thought back to my earliest days, to my mom cradling me when I discovered my abilities. 2. I thought about all the late-night dinners we had because she worked so late, but insisted on always being there to tuck me in, to read to me, to listen to how my day was going. 3. I thought about how dedicated she was to not just being my mom, but my friend. The first person I came out to and the first person who loved and accepted me as I am. What I truly am. 4. I thought about the prospect of losing her. Of living in this world on my own and with no support. "Okay, I'll do it." The words left my mouth before I'd had a chance to even think it over. "Love will do that to you, I guess." Bo lowered the gun and nodded to his subordinates to grab me, my mom screaming in protest until Bo pistol whipped her with such force I heard bone break and she slumped to the ground, unmoving. Before I could wrestle free, the same was done to me and I felt my body collide with the concrete, a ringing in my ears and my vision going blurry as Bo's twirrer creature crawled from my doorway and towards me, teeth bared and a tar-like substance dripping from its jaws. This was it, this was how I died. At the hands of crazed martyrs doing the dirty work of a megalomaniacal hate-filled maggot of a creature wearing human skin. Trust in Nuldus. The thought entered my mind like a fond memory, the words forming a shape that became crystal clear in my mind, a figure of unimaginable comprehension and beauty. Defying any understanding of anatomy and scope, it looked upon me and smiled as it placed a hand on my face. "Become what you were meant to be." I felt rough hands pick me up as I grabbed for my phone and shrieked the name at the top of my lungs. Nuldus. No sooner had I done so, the rest of the group in the call did as well, a cacophony of voices racked by pain and suffering calling out for someone to aid them, for something to reach out of the void and touch us. Something did. It happened in quick succession, the skies darkened as if a storm were gathering overhead. Bitter winds billowed in from the south and chilled me to the bone, the vibrant sun hidden behind a black sphere and casting an eclipse with colors I don't dare to mention out loud, draping the entire cul-de-sac in its hue. As each member looked up at the sky, they dropped to their knees and jaws fell agape, frothing at the mouth as something black and viscous seeped from every pore of their bodies. All but Bo fell to the ground as the call kept chanting Nuldus' name. "What in God's name, you are a satanic demon. A creature from the deepest pits of hell. Well, I know what to do with enemies of the Lord," he pointed the gun at me with a malicious grin. But it was gonna happen one way or another. Something bellowed from above. A guttural noise that deafened me and brought me to a knee but flattened Bo to the ground, breaking his arms and leaving the gun on the ground. As I focused, I saw a tendril holding him in place and pushing itself into his very skin, causing the same symptoms the others experienced. But I'm one of God's children, the righteous, made in his image, he croaked as I steadied myself and looked around, the twirrer version of him eviscerated and being dragged up into the sky, still screeching. I had no idea what would happen to it, but I didn't care in that moment. I checked on my mom and took careful steps towards him, seeing fear in his eyes for the first time. Why isn't God coming to save me? To send you to hell. I'm a good person, I believe in the scripture, the sanctity of life. You're a sinner. A freak who thinks they can change the way God made them. He cried, pain rushing through his body as the shock wore off. Wrong. I'm simply being what I was always meant to be. I stood up and watched as the same black bile escaped from every pore of his skin, burning him and taking him into Nuldu's loving arms. That was a month ago. The incidents in my town were kept within the walls of the white picket fences, the locals mostly glad to be freed of the cross-examiners and the rest scared into silence. Bridges need to be rebuilt and many older members of the community still do not understand what we are, but they're learning. They know we will defend ourselves. Any authority figure that came around asking was swiftly turned away or given no information. You can't find what isn't here anymore, after all. I still avoid mirrors. I find the notion of standing in front of them too long to be uncomfortable, fear-inducing, and like I'm taking a big risk. Maybe that's the dysphoria, maybe it's the concern I'll see something else lurking on the other side, but I have to keep trying. So, I think back to the last words I ever said to Bo in a moment of adrenaline, words that would ultimately let me live a life free of fear, persecution, and hatred. I stood in front of a mirror today, using them as a declaration not only to him and his God, but the world at large that I wasn't going anywhere, that we weren't going anywhere. I'm Alex. I'm beyond the spectrum. I trust in Nuldus, and I just want to live.